on. But right now, we welcome Senator David Parker, represents District 2. That's DeSoto County, serves as the chair of the Senate Accountability, Efficiency, Transparency Committee, vice chair, Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. Good to see you, Senator. Thanks for coming in. I know it's a busy time down there at the Capitol. Did I get all that right? Is that still where? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Duties. I apologize for being late.
No.
I ran here as quick as I can. We're kind of in between a couple of things, and timing worked out good.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being here. It's good to see you, good to hear from you, especially when we've got lots of activities going on down there at the Capitol, and I guess we're about to wind it up here, potentially, right?
Well, it's looking like we're getting on track now.
Okay.
So as we came into the week, you never know kind of what direction you're going to go when you come into a week of the legislature, and it looks like the lanes are converging to a place where hopefully we can meet and make it to the finish line. Okay.
Well, at the top of that list, I submit would be funding for education in the state of Mississippi, and I put it at the top of the list because it does consume over 50% of our general funds. It's at about 52, 53%, so that's obviously a big budgetary item, and that's typically the case in all 50 states. But we've got this rather old funding formula, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, also known as MAEP. The Senate's approach to maybe adjusting that formula somewhat includes some suggestions, some proposals to do so. The House, on the other hand, seeks to completely overhaul the formula and replace it with the new INSPIRE formula. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. But it looks like we've got a bit of a gulf between what the Senate wants and the House wants. Might we get an agreement before we get out of here?
Well, the latest things I'm hearing is that there are some talks going on, and like always in any Senate session or legislative session, House session, we each, as our respective side, have our position that we bring forward, and at the end of the day, we try to find a meeting of the minds where we recognize the good points in each of those positions. And I want to commend Senator DeBar, Representative Robson on the other side for working together. I think they are working together in a way where maybe we can get some resolution, adjust the formula, make some changes that would be good going forward. And I look forward to seeing if the two of them can get a product worked out.
We should point out, respectively, chairman of the education committees in their houses.
For each of the chambers, correct.
Yeah. So we're headed to conference on that at this point. Is that kind of where it stands? I haven't checked whether or not we have conferees assigned yet.
So there may, as always, need to be some procedural moves that need to be made to get whatever vehicle there is necessary to the finish line.
Okay.
So I think, once there's hopefully some degree of a meeting of the minds, then we'll establish the vehicle. There is not a vehicle at this time that has conferees assigned.
Okay. All right. Do you have a personal position? Where do you stand on these two different approaches?
I think the MAEP formula has always been a very challenging formula to understand. My big issue's been with it for many years. When we were in economic downturns, we would come in and, the state budget was down, dollars in were down, and we would see that the formula was up, and it didn't seem to really be tied to any economic indicators that could take into account how the state or how the country as a whole was doing. So I know in the Senate position there were some indicators in there. I know Senator Barr had adjusted looking at like a 20-year average of how the country was doing instead of just a 2-year look back as the MAEP does. And so I think, kind of basing it on some real economic indicators is one of the keys, I think, in both versions that have been proposed.
Okay. Yeah, I think in the MAEP formula, as I recall, there's a component of the formula that is based on historic CPI, and there's an adjustment to the base.
Right.
I can't remember, like 40% of that figure or something like that. I think the change that was proposed in the Senate was to half that to 20. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
Well, the Senate position, as I remember, you were looking back more at the indexes over a 20-year period.
Okay.
Instead of looking back 2 years ago, because and again, I'm not chair of education.
Yeah,
I do serve
yeah.
on education. I consider myself to be fairly versed in it, probably
Sure.
like yourself.
Yeah.
But if we have a good year this year, 2 years from now, if we're having a terrible year and we're looking back to see how we did this year to make decisions about how should we adjust the formula, we're really not looking at real-time data.
Okay.
I think there's a desire to be a little more comprehensive in the facts and figures to get a better idea of what we need to do.
Makes sense. Mobile sports betting is something that was passed in the House. That was Representative Casey Urey's bill, would have enabled sports betting on mobile devices anywhere inside the boundaries of the state. Those companies would be required to partner with an existing casino property and operator in the state. That goes over to the Senate and didn't get out of committee. Senator David Blunt serves as the gaming chairman in the Senate. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that that's something we should do here in the state of Mississippi?
So I guess I'm one of those dinosaurs that you have on occasionally who I've always had issues with some of the alcohol bills that we passed. How we've changed resort status to be the intersection of two roads now, instead of really what I would call a true resort status. On the gaming issues, I guess fundamentally I would say that that's not something I'm very supportive of, just in general. I do have a son, who lives up near the Tennessee line, who is very involved in that, and he and I probably don't see eye to eye on that issue. But if that bill had come forward, I would have probably been a no on it. So I'm probably not your best expert to give you the details. I'm one of those who they probably don't share the details with because they figure, well, he's probably not going to be supportive of that if it made it to the floor.
Do you have a feel of what may have happened had it made it to the floor of the Senate? Have you talked to other senators about their position on this enough to get a sense of that?
I would guess, just based on other bills of similar measures, that it would probably pass. That would be my guess. But again, I'm not your
fair enough.
Expert source on that by any means.
I believe that as well, and that's just based on, again, purely anecdotal, informal conversations with members of the Senate. We got a break right here, but you can hang around with us for now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got Senator David Parker in the Element Well studio, coming right back. On middays, we're chatting with Senator David Parker, represents DeSoto County. All right, so we hit up on the education funding and also mobile sports betting. I started with those. Those are obviously a couple of a range of major issues that I think have been deliberated in the House and Senate this year. Let's talk about the ballot initiative. That is something, of course, that you had some involvement in your committee. Explain there for us, Senator, your position. Essentially, it doesn't look like we're going to get anything once again.
So what happened on it is, as you are probably aware, there are two bills that are necessary to reinstitute the ballot initiative. You have a constitutional amendment, which requires a two-thirds vote of the legislature in both chambers to pass. And then you have more of a procedural bill, which kind of sets into motion, basically, should that pass, how that's going to be put into effect.
Yeah.
So I introduced both bills. I introduced the code section, and I did a lot of work on trying to find something that would be pleasing to the people who have reservations about the previous way it was done and who have reservations about maybe how it might be done in the future. And I thought I got to a product that would be agreeable to most of the chamber. And so we made some changes in that, but procedurally I brought both of them out of committee. They were both assigned to my committee, by the way. And I brought the one that required just a simple majority vote to the floor first. And as I was talking to the Senate's senators, as I was explaining the bill, I told them, I said, we'd see kind of how we stand on this bill, because if we can get consensus on this bill and get it, passed, then I think we can bring up the constitutional amendment bill. And so we made a lot of changes. I did remove the provision in there where we had the legislative alternative. I found that the legislative alternative method that we had, and at least to me, was somewhat confusing. And so the change that we made instead of that in the language I proposed was that should a measure make it to the ballot and actually be voted on by the voters, it would require a 60% threshold to pass, but the legislature would not be proposing an alternative to that. And so it would be a lot more straightforward. We spent a lot of time talking about that on the floor. The members of the Democratic Party, they wanted to see that 60% threshold move down to a simple majority to be put on the ballot. They offered an amendment which was robustly defeated on the Senate floor. And so I offered an amendment to move that 60% up to 67%, because the feeling in the room was that they didn't feel like it was going to be, I guess, a strong enough process. That amendment passed easily, to make that change, and this is the general language bill. But the bill at the end, even with making that change, passed by basically one vote. It passed by one vote because several Democratic members went back after they voted and changed their vote. They originally voted no on it over that issue I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so we were nowhere close on our side of the chamber to having 67%. And so had we passed that bill and had it gone into law, which wouldn't happen without the constitutional part,
right,
it really wouldn't have done anything. And so I made the decision to just kind of revisit again in the future, and what I would encourage your listeners, if it's something that you're passionate about, I would reach out to, your legislators who still have concerns, express your concerns to them, because we have to have a 67% threshold in both chambers to pass that type of bill. And it has to have both. The vehicle that was sent over to us from the House would not have achieved that. It was just kind of like an opening volley type of bill to get the conversation started. And I know Price Wallace has been instrumental on his side in working on that. So I look forward to further conversation on it, but we have to get a strong, vote to pass that. And as you know from the history too, the state of Mississippi instituted the ballot initiative, I believe, in 1914.
Right.
And it's been challenged multiple times. And I think we've only had a total of about maybe 20 years since 1914 where it's actually been active and actually been something that could be used because of these same types of issues and questions that might arise.
So just want to be clear, the two bills, one would be a resolution, correct? That would go to the ballot to ratify the Constitution, to amend the Constitution.
Right. So the one that was overturned basically by the Supreme Court had a provision in there that you cannot modify that.
Okay.
And so that was one of the clarifiers in there. So there's not a way that you can go back and modify that. You can't modify the Constitution without another vote.
Gotcha.
And so our previous resolution that instated that at the last time will forever remain in our Constitution.
Okay.
We don't have a way to take it out.
Gotcha.
And so this new alternative would come in as a new measure into the Constitution, which then requires the passage in both chambers by 67%, and then that would have to go to the ballot.
Right.
And the voters would then have to decide if they want to reinstitute the ballot initiative by a vote, and then it would come back, and then the procedural part of it would start.
Okay.
So it is a more laborious type of task to get there, and I kid sometimes. I tell people AET, which is what I chair.
Yep.
Nobody can remember what that stands for, so I've renamed it Additional Education and Thought. And as you've heard the discussion on that bill, that's I think why bills like that end up there, because it's not a slam dunk. Okay, let's accept this and go forward. It's how do we do this and make the whole scenario work out. Yeah,
I think the bottom line is there is not alignment. There's no congruence between the two chambers on this matter, and it just doesn't look like we're going to get anything. This would be, let's see, the third session where we've dealt with this matter.
And it's my first time to really deal with it as AET chairman.
Okay.
It's my first time to introduce a bill and actually put the work into it.
Yep.
And it was the first time that it's come out of committee, and it's the first time it's come to the floor this year of the Senate for a vote. And so I'm proud that we got the work into it to move it that far. And I look forward to kind of finding out what tweaks or solutions we can make to it. If it is what people really want to have us do. And if they do not want us to do that, certainly we should not be doing it, but we have to work to find a solution.
I think I can say that in general, sitting in this chair and observing messages that come in across the state, there is strong support for restoring it. I don't know if that's what you're hearing from your constituents, and I've recommended the same. I think your advice is effective and is appropriate, which is talk to your legislators,
right,
and express to them how you feel about this if you want to see this thing reinstated.
And we do want to do this right. There are only 25 states that actually have the ballot initiative process, and I would say there are a good 10 of them that regret the fact that they have it in the form that they do, because they have passed some wild things, and they continue in those states to try to modify their existing process to make it not be as challenging for their state, on some of these issues that might pop up.
And I respect some members, such as Senator Polk, who's been very straightforward in his opposition. He just says,
right,
hey, look, that's what you elect us for. We don't really need this. And
right,
I kudos to him for maybe jumping into the fire pit there with his views, but he's expressing his views from his heart, from his mind, and that's what I think a good elected official ought to do. We may not agree
right
with it, but that's the way it ought to work.
And he's the kind of legislator that with my thoughts, I tried to move the needle towards.
Yeah.
Trying to get it where
higher threshold,
more more well thought out.
Yeah.
On how we can prevent the dollar from outside states kind of changing our laws here.
I know the lieutenant governor has expressed that concern as well about some well-funded external parties coming into the state and getting a measure on the ballot. No matter what, as you know, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of organization to get a measure to the ballot. As you've said, it hasn't been used, honestly, too frequently in the history, given as long as it's been out there. And I don't know that anybody has anything specific in mind, honestly. I've not heard that. I've heard Medicaid expansion, abortion. Of course, I think both chambers are in agreement that abortion should not be available, is what I've heard.
That was in my language.
Yeah. So
we exclude that.
As an example. Of course, you guys are hammering out Medicaid expansion right now. If you can hang around, we'll talk about that.
Sure.
On the other side of the break, we've got Senator David Parker in the Element Wealth studio. So just a final comment about the abortion now seems to be the popular issue to get on the ballot in the wake of the Dobbs case, because it turned the matter back over to the state. So I think it was predictable that lots of states would act, including the state of Mississippi. But in many states, either pro-choice or pro-life groups have gotten measures to the ballot. Thus far, all the pro-life folks have lost in every state. There are 8 other states that are going to decide on abortion via ballot measure in this year, Arizona being one of them that just essentially reinstated an 1864 law. We're digressing a bit, but nonetheless, it's a hot potato issue, and it looks like that the ballot measure process is being used rather extensively across the state to make law, essentially.
Right,
So,
and that's why I think you have 25 of the states using that and 25 who don't, and it's a good right we have to elect our senators and our representatives, and I encourage people to always look into the people who are running for office. Meet with them, talk to them, and
Sure.
kind of learn what they're about. Because if an issue is very important to you, you should know where your politician stands.
Sure.
On that. So.
Absolutely. Good advice. Appreciate
Yep.
that. All right, let's start with the PERS issue. I know you've been heavily involved in that one. Senator, in my view, in my years of observing the action in the Capitol, has probably got more attention, the public employees retirement system this year, than any prior year that I can remember.
Right. It kind of started, we got a report in October that showed that the PERS system had about $30.4 billion in their fund. And through the hearings that were held, we learned that, of course, the big month for PERS disbursements is in December,
Yep.
Where they have an additional $850 million that goes out for the COLA checks that are distributed. And so by my estimate, as we came into this year, 2024, I think the account would have had somewhere around $30 billion in it as we entered the session. And the estimate we heard from PERS at the beginning of the session was around that number. 30 to 31 billion was what they had. And so based on that information, the PERS board decided to make a change to the employer contribution. And as you know, they suggested that we raise it by 2%, and that 2% would generate some extra revenue into the fund based on the fact that their actuary had said that there had been a decrease amount in the fund that put the fund more in jeopardy. It was interesting in the hearing, though, as you know, as someone who's watching stocks closely, as I try to, this has been a better first quarter of the year than most. And so we found in the hearing that the PERS account actually had $33 billion in it instead of 31. So there's an extra couple million or so, a couple billion
yep.
that showed up there. Mm-hmm. And so one of my questions was, knowing that information now, would there be any desire of the actuary to maybe adjust the institution of that 2% based on this new knowledge? And there did not seem to be. And the other information from the hearing was that we've had the same actuary for 5 years giving advice to the PERS board. And I'll say this, the PERS board members we met in that hearing, I think are very representative of the members as a whole. I got well over 1,000 emails asking me to keep the current PERS members on that board. And I think they're elected by the people in the 8 groups that select them. And I found the 3 who
PERS
testified.
PERS groups.
PERS groups.
Yep.
I found the 3 who testified before government structure to be very good representatives of the people that had elected them. Mm-hmm. What I was a little discouraged by was that the actuary giving advice to the board has changed the position so much over the last 5 years. We've gone from times where we're told that the system is 90% solvent, to this year being told it's 56% solvent. And part of that is that the actuary has made a change over the last few years on the anticipated rate of return down from 7.75% down to 7%. Well, that adjustment down has basically shown that in the future you're estimating that the return of the the balance in the account is going to deliver 7% instead of close to 8%. And so as you look 20 or 30 years ahead, that's going to be less money in there. And so I think some of their advice from the actuary could use a little bit of extra input. And so what's floating around now in both the House and the Senate is a provision to try to get some extra actuaries giving advice to the board. These would be outsiders who are looking at it from a lens that's maybe a little bit different than the current actuary. They would not be board members. There's no bill alive that would change the board in any way, shape, or form. But hopefully we would get some more insight and financial advice because I don't think the state of Mississippi or any investor as a person could ever have too much advice. You just have to plow through it and find the best advice to make the best decisions.
Well, and so a couple of things. First is I believe the board actually enacted a 5 percentage point total increase, 2% a year for 3 years, except the final year would be 1. The actuaries actually suggested 10 percentage points, right? So I just want to clarify, it's 2% that goes into effect this July, tentatively at this point.
Right.
Your legislation, you inserted some amendments, would stop that, and the Houses did too, let's be honest.
It would stop it for now,
yeah.
And it would have the actuaries come in, look at it,
yep.
and then make, a suggestion back to the legislature.
Yeah.
And it may very well be that we do need to make an increase.
Yeah.
But based on the merits that I was telling you earlier, I'm just not. If the actuary over the last 5 years had said, 5 years ago things are trending a little down, we need to be watching this, and then it's trending a little more down, a little more, now it's becoming a problem, we need to do something, I would feel more confident with that. But to be told 2 years ago that the system was 90+% solvent and then make some change and then tell us it's 56% just gives, I think many in the legislature a desire to want to just analyze it a little bit more. But I'll say this too: there is no desire by myself or any legislator that I've talked to decrease or remove the commitments we've made to our retirees.
Yeah, and I've heard that.
There's
from
nothing
everybody.
alive that's going to make a cut, that's going to do a cut. We just want to make sure that the fund balance going forward has the best eyes on it, to allow that to be generational for not just the generation receiving benefits now, but for the kids and the grandkids of current retirees to maybe also get the benefits that they have.
And we've pointed it out on this program multiple times. I think it bears repeating. Only the legislature can adjust benefits.
Exactly.
The PERS board cannot. They actually have fairly limited power. Honestly, it's the hiring of these third-party consultants, the actuary, the investment managers. They then, with their guidance, set and vote on the target investment rate, and then they can modify, as you just talked about, the employer contribution rate. However, your amendment would strip them of that power, right? Would require the legislature, which currently has the power to adjust the employee rate. This would also confer that power transferred essentially to the legislature, right?
So they would make the recommendation, and the legislature would implement it, which is basically what happens right now anyway.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, that power is moving from one to the other, but to your point earlier, this is always on the back of the legislature, no matter how you kind of frame it. It's going to.
Well, it was created by law.
It's created by law, and it's our duty. It's my duty as a legislator to make sure that we keep the retirees that have spent their life in service for this state solvent, so that they can know and understand that their benefits are going to be there for them, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
So another thing is that you're right, that I've heard from multiple members of the legislature that what really got them thinking about making some potential change here to the governance structure was just concerns about the way in which you got shocked into, man, we're 93% funded, and then the next year is 56%. We should also point out the year prior and a couple years prior, it was still below the 80% target.
Right.
I think if I were to hear that, I'd say, I think we need to get a second opinion here. You're a physician. You know how that works.
Right.
I think it's prudent. And I recall you asking one of the members of the board, if I'm not mistaken, Senator, would you have an issue if we just had some perhaps additional consultants providing input? Right? Did I frame that correctly?
I think I asked two, and the two that I did ask that question to welcome that.
Yeah.
And so I think they are looking out for the people just like we are. I think we're partners in this situation, and we can make this stronger going forward as partners.
Right, I agree. I got one more question for you before you go. There's a lot of consternation about the supplemental legislative retirement plan. We've pointed out numerous times that's really not having any impact on PERS. Would you be opposed to a plan to possibly just phase that additional benefit out?
Yeah, it's not a portion of my retirement kind of planning.
Yeah.
So me, philosophically, I would not have a problem with that.
I want to see you drop a bill to do that next year. Appreciate you, Senator. Thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you.
Yep. Senator David Parker has been our guest on Middays. Coming right back with more. Don't forget,